It's a fairly common idea to take older games and update them for the new generation, and it's not a recent trend by any means. The 1997 release of Frogger for the PlayStation 1 attempted to utilize the basic rules and control scheme of the arcade classic, but in new, massive levels and with 3D graphics. The result turned Frogger into less of an arcade game and more of an adventure, but the overall quality suffers due to clashing ideas in the game's design. The game is categorized by zones, each with a different theme, which are then broken up into levels. The rules to Frogger are simple and they stay consistent throughout the game. The player guides Frogger from one end of the map to the other, reaching each colored baby frog at the end. After reaching one frog, the player restarts the level and repeats the process for each frog. This setup works well for the arcade original, but it becomes a problem as the game quickly expands beyond this original scope. Some of the levels work out pretty well because they stay closer to the format of the original map. Levels like Honeybee Hollow, Dark Cavern, and Bang Bang Barrel all have the missing baby frogs easily located towards the north end of the map. It's not so much about exploration as it is about skillful timing. Unfortunately, the majority of the levels do not follow suit, and instead, they attempt to be gargantuan mazes with as many deadly traps as possible. Take Lily Islands for example, as it's a fairly simple stage in comparison to the later ones. The player begins with a long, unnecessary ride on a log before finally arriving at an island. From here, the most direct path eventually leads to a street where 3 of the 5 frogs can be found. So what about the other 2? After spending a good half hour eliminating every possibility, it turns out that these lily pads off to the side actually count as platforms, and that the path leads to the remaining 2 frogs. Maybe this doesn't sound like a big deal until you factor in some of the other aspects of the game. One mistake costs Frogger an extra life, and brings the player back to the start of the level. That's standard for a video game, but it becomes pretty frustrating when the landing and hit detection aren't quite spot on. Every once in a while, a near perfect jump simply won't count. Now, place a very strict time limit on top of this, and you can't approach any situation with the caution that you need. So after rescuing those first 3 frogs, you're running all over the place like a madman, searching every nook and cranny, but there's no way you're going to complete the level in time. It's nearly impossible. So you need to start over and memorize the routes you need to take before going for one final attempt. Of course, a game over restarts all the progress you made for that level, so it all needs to be done with limited lives. Although the game is pretty generous in handing out extra lives, they all go surprisingly fast. And again, Lily Islands is a very simple stage. Bow Wow Falls tasks you with getting past 3 dogs, but the camera is so far zoomed in that you can't see the 3rd dog until you've begun to proceed, and there doesn't appear to be any discernible pattern whatsoever. Normally, I wouldn't mind waiting for an opening, but I can't wait with the time limit bearing down on me. So I get the purple frog and ride the balloon to the blue frog. This was a pretty long path, so I think it's safe to assume that I'm done here. I go down a second path for the orange and green frogs, but the red frog is eluding me. I have absolutely no idea where it is, and I get several game overs just looking for it. Turns out, the path continues after the blue frog. A balloon appears from way off screen, which leads you to the final frog. I just wasted so much time because I didn't spend a little extra searching this small area all the way in the very corner of the map. But can you blame me? The game sends the player back to the beginning after each frog, and the time limit leaves very little room for error, let alone exploration. But that's not even the worst of it. Try Mower Mania. It's a maze with a ton of obstacles trying to kill you, and I do use the term maze very strongly. This whole game is built on trial and error because so many little things are off screen and so many deaths feel unfair. Zoom out the camera just a little bit or make the time limit more lenient or something. It feels like the whole game is trying to work as hard as it can to give you a hard time. Challenge is one thing, but this just feels unfair. Boulder Alley deliberately places the camera in such a horribly awkward position while asking the player to dodge boulders. Then there's slime sliding. The titular mechanic is annoying enough as is, but then there's this section. It's like it's a sick joke. This is where I had to draw the line. I try my best to finish every game I can, but Frogger is nothing more than a test of frustration. It's a real shame because some levels aren't all that bad. Scorching Switches is creative enough without having to be a huge mess. Platform Madness is a little difficult to work around since it's awkward to judge the height from this angle, but the level is small enough that restarting isn't as big of a deal. Lava Crush mixes in some projectile dodging with decent platforming. There's actually a little bit of good level design here, but it's all mixed in with some horrible design decisions meant to completely waste the player's time. Even if the level design is decent, it's still plagued with awful hit detection and sloppy controls. As much as I hate Frogger 97, it is important to understand that this was an early PlayStation 1 game that predates some of the stronger platforming classics on the same console, such as Spyro the Dragon and Ape Escape. Still, for a 3D based game, there's not really a whole lot going on in the third dimension. Frogger only moves on a grid, as well as jumping and falling, while enemies and obstacles follow preset patterns of movement. At its very core, Frogger is such a simple game, but it still trips over the littlest things, at best, while at worst, it blindfolds the player and pushes them through an unforgiving obstacle course. I can't recommend Frogger 97 to anyone. There is plenty of variety and a lot of levels, but most of them are awful. The concept is easy to grasp, but the game is painful and annoying throughout. Simply put, this is a poor game all around. It's such a shame because the graphics are charming, the music is nice, and the general idea sets up for a decent game, but it just can't stop falling apart over its own setbacks. Thank you for watching my review of Frogger 97. If you enjoyed this video, click the like button, and if you'd like to see more, subscribe.